Let us now move forward for the speech of the chief guest who will be addressing the House. Let me take a moment to introduce our chief guest who will be delivering the keynote address, followed by a brief interaction. Dr. Gupta is a veteran IAS officer of the 1986 batch. He is presently Director General of Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management, GIDM. Besides that, he is also Director of SARC Disaster Management Center. In a career spanning more than 36 years, Sir has served at various positions with the government of Gujarat as Additional Chief Secretary, as ACS Industries and Mines Department, ACS Home, ACS Forest and Environment, and Principal Secretary of Urban Development Department, and also the Principal Secretary of Climate Change Department. He's also headed various Government of Gujarat companies as chairman. Under the overarching and long-term visionary guidance of the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Gupta was actually instrumental in the successful development of Statue of Unity, which everybody must be proud of, in Gujarat. And it was set up in a very record time. And the other very important, there are many things to talk about his very, very large CV. But one of the other things that we remember Dr. Gupta in public memory is his brilliant leadership during the times of COVID, when he was handed over the command for battling the COVID war from Ahmedabad. And it is much appreciated by all of us and a lot of people in the city. Having rich experience of working in the government of Gujarat, he has acquired deep understanding of resources, capacities and SOPs of various frontline responding departments. And as collector and district magistrate, his performance in disaster management is equally enviable. Dr. Gupta is a gold medalist in post-graduation and has a PhD in international law. He has undergone training at Asian Disaster Preparedness Center in Bangkok and United Nations University, Tokyo, and also United Nations Institute for Training and Research in the University of Melbourne, Howard Kennedy School, and the Graduate School in Geneva. Can we please have Dr. Rajiv Kumar Gupta for his address now, sir, please.
My dear friend of over 2.5 decades, Dr. J.M. Vyas, the founder, Vice Chancellor of this national and having international reputation university. My colleague, very dynamic police officers of the state, Shri Narasimha Komar, the campus director, Purvi Ben, Mr. Desai, Mr. Solanki, and the one who has been a bridge of communication between me and the university, Air Commodore Thakur, who's very sweet, very courteous, and yet very disciplined. Ladies and gentlemen, and above all, students for whom we have all gathered here. It's nostalgically pleasant to be here. And the reason I shared with Sri J.M. Vyas is more of a personal nature. One of the incidents he has already narrated. I used to be a neighbor, actually a next door neighbor, staying in Sector 9 almost 27 years ago, when this institution was known only as Forensic Science Laboratory. And I stayed in Sector 9 for almost 2 decades before I superannuated. And I've seen how physically, structurally, educationally, intellectually, nationally and internationally, this institution has grown. So, as I said, I'm nostalgically pleasant. It's a very nostalgically pleasant occasion for me to be here. Disasters happen at every level. They occur at every plane, in every realm. Individuals, institutions, societies, nations and states, they all experience disasters at different points of time, in different intensities, due to different reasons. At the level of individuals, even the failure to pass an examination is also a disaster. Death of a near and dear one can also be termed as a disaster. And if I can say so, break up with a girlfriend is also a disaster. One has to garner strength and develop patience to deal with that. At the level of institutions, breakdown of systems is a disaster. And it takes a lot of time and efforts for remaking, rebuilding it. In case of societies, sudden breakdown of harmony, camaraderie is also a disaster. And it takes massive strength and perseverance to restore the society back into order. But what we are discussing here is not disasters at the individual, social, or institutional planes. But as Dr. Vyas rightly said, disasters at the national and subnational level, which may be due to natural reasons or man-made reasons. And the role of guardians of law and order, especially police, in dealing with those disasters, and in the aftermath of disasters in the medium and the long run. Now, the word natural is disputed in the disaster management community, and especially by the experts of disaster management. I have a very candid submission before you. I don't consider myself to be an expert in disaster management. I'm just like a student, just like you. I've always been a student in my life, and I continue to be so. Disaster management experts say, oh, no, disasters are natural. There is some reason behind them. So they can't be termed. Nature by nature doesn't create disasters. That's what they say. But I humbly beg to differ. I will not dwell much upon this. But then, there are people like Hugerbeets. Has anyone heard of Hugerbeets? Hugerbeet is a living oracle of disaster. He is an oracle of earthquakes. We talked about Turkey, and I just remembered that I should mention Hugerbeets here. Hugerbeets is a scientist, we can call him. He is an astronomer, he is a physicist, he is an earthquake expert, if you can say. And Hugerbeets predicts earthquakes in the world. And Vyasi, you would be surprised to know, and you all also would be surprised to know, that he predicted the earthquake in Gaziantep in Turkey 6 days before it happened. On 30th of January, he predicted that there is a natural phenomenon which is building up. And the earthquake in Turkey, I think, happened, that's in southeastern part of Turkey. We call it southeastern Anatolia. It happened in Turkey in just 6 days' time. And why I remembered Hugo Beats, there is another reason, is because of the tremors in Delhi and North India. And let's see, all of us. Hugo Beats has predicted that in another 3 to 4 days or 5 days' time, there could be an earthquake in Pakistan, in Baluchistan province. Now, how does he do it? Why? Because I started from the natural phenomenon. So how Hugo Beats does it? He does it by something most of us sitting here are familiar with. Astronomy. The movement of stars. What he calls is the solar system geometry survey. The solar system geometry survey. So which is nothing but the movement of the stars at that point of time. Now, most of us know that the movement, the planetary movement leads to, and there is a science also in this. The movement of moon causes the sea level rise and fall. The Earth's gravitational sphere is affected by the movement of sun. So what Hugo Beats does is nothing else but the age-old science of astronomy and astrology of India. And he predicts the changes in the electromagnetic field of Earth. And he has developed a software wherein he feeds and he predicts. So when Hugo Beats also indicates the earthquakes much in advance, I think I'm of the school of opinion, I'm of the school of thought that disasters can easily, for understanding's sake, be classified between natural and man-made. So as you go along in the science of disaster management, you will also come across this particular very tough view that no disasters are natural and disasters have everything, something in common with some of the other reasons. Now let's talk about the definitional aspect. Can we make it full screen? No. It's full screen. Okay. So disaster consists of damage to property, loss of human life, damage to environment, and any event which is beyond the capacity, existing capacity. Then later on we develop capacity to deal with this, the aftermath of the community to cope with that. Now this is a definition. Gujarat, under the visionary leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, also enacted an act, Disaster Management Act, and which clearly defines what is a disaster. And that act also identifies disasters as natural and man-made. I'll explain to you what are the main disaster risks in Gujarat. And we have a disaster atlas. The government prepared a disaster atlas, identified and classified different geographical parts of Gujarat, what kind of disasters they are prone to. So certain parts of Gujarat are prone to earthquake. In certain parts of Gujarat, the friction between the Indo-Australian tectonic plate and the Eurasian tectonic plate. These are very common terms, the tectonic plates used in explaining the earthquakes. So the friction between these two tectonic plates creates high risk zone of earthquakes. And then they are classified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on their intensity. And certain parts of Gujarat, and mind you, Kutch, Banaskantha, these are very, very high risk areas of earthquake for Gujarat. Gujarat has over 1600 kilometers of coastline, the longest coastline in the country. So obviously, when we are having the longest coastline in the country, we are going to be prone to cyclonic disasters. Unfortunately, the occurrence and the intensity of cyclones in the last 50 years has increased because of sea level rise, because of El Nino, and many other climate factors. I mean, experts, and it's based on the secondary data, the occurrence of cyclones has increased by 52% in the last 50 years. So cyclones have become quite a regular phenomenon. And storm surges, they are in the aftermath of cyclones. Again, a classified disaster. We have identified the coastal areas of Gujarat which are more prone to cyclonic storm surge, floods. Now, there is a definite geographical portion of Gujarat which is more prone to floods, and that is south of Gujarat. Now, it's interestingly, there was a time when Gujarat used to be a water deficient state. There was a time when water used to be transported from water surplus areas of Gujarat to water deficient areas of Gujarat by trains. And me and Mr. J.M. Vyas have witnessed it. There was a time when ladies used to take 8 or 10 liters of water on their head and walk 5-7 kilometers to fetch it. But all that, and the time I'm referring to, ladies and gentlemen, is not a distant past. It's just about 25 years back. This water scarcity was a serious phenomenon in Gujarat because 80% of the water resources of Gujarat are located in 20% of geographical area, and 20% of Gujarat's water resources are located in 80% of geographical area. So there is a spatial imbalance of the availability of water resources in Gujarat, and therein comes the threat of floods. The floodplains of South Gujarat have snow-fed rivers or perennial rivers. North Gujarat and Saurashtra and Kutch do not have any perennial rivers. There are 159 rivers in Gujarat and streams which run only 10 days in a year. But South Gujarat has Tapi, Narmada, Mahi, which are again, they swell and flood the entire plain. So we have mapped the flood risks prone areas in Gujarat, and then of course, Gujarat and Maharashtra. These are the two states which contribute to 90% of the chemicals and petrochemicals production in the country, of which more than 50% is the share of Gujarat. The entire belt from Ahmedabad to Vapi is about 400 kilometers of belt, which is known as Golden Corridor. It has thousands and thousands of industrial units which deal in toxic chemicals. And these chemicals sometimes lead to disasters. So they have also been mapped, and a lot of work has also been done in mapping these disaster-prone areas. So what we're talking here, what are the disaster risks of various types of disasters in Gujarat? And now how a disaster is dealt with. We are focusing on the role of police, but facing a disaster, dealing with this, dealing with the aftermath, dealing with the rescue and relief operations is a multi-sectoral job. There are many agencies, the Revenue Department, armed forces sometimes, Air Force, health workers, fire brigade obviously, and then for relief, for distribution of food, NGOs, distribution of medicines, NGOs, and of course the people who are in the immediate vicinity of the disaster. So disaster is basically And in managing disaster or management of disaster is a multi-sectoral, multi-agency job. Obviously, the police plays a very, very key role in this. Who are the first responders? Disaster takes place. We've been talking to Nasima Koma about giving some primary training to our police patrol vans. There are 800 police patrol vans in Gujarat. And each one has 4 to 5 people working in them. Now they are the first responders. Because police patrol van, it goes across, crisscrosses the entire jurisdiction in a few hours, a couple of times. So police, most of the time, is the first responder in case of a disaster, apart from those people who were present on the site or the nearest community. Fire brigade, health services. We have specialized disaster management forces. As I said, under the long-term vision of the Honorable Prime Minister, the entire national setup for disaster management has been created. National apex level bodies and state level bodies have been created. So we have a specialized force headed by a very, very senior police officer, which is known as National Disaster Response Force, NDRF. And then replicating that at the state level, we have a state disaster relief or disaster response force, SDRF. Armed forces have been of great help, especially the Air Force in evacuating people, in dropping of food packets, and of course the community. You would be surprised to see the variety of police services or variety of police arms. There are more than 16. I think a few are still left out. We have 100,000 policemen on roll, almost 100,000. I'm making a round figure. And these figures I got to know only when I became Home Secretary. And then there are more than 100,000 who can be termed as not on regular role, but they are on honorary services, paid, sometimes paid services, who are known as Home Guards, Gram Rakshak Dal, civil defense people. And then we have large number of policemen. So over 200,000 people in the state of Gujarat belong to the police force. What are their advantages as first responders? They are uniform, disciplined, they have an immediate presence. They are familiar with the terrain, because familiarity with the terrain is very, very important when you rescue people, when you take people to safe locations. And disaster, except for certain disasters like flood and cyclone, which can be predicted, and of course now the earthquake also, sometimes a disaster happens just like that. They have good knowledge of local people, local terrain, local routes, and of course, most of them, they enjoy the community trust. They're familiar faces, and they can help set up a sense of trust in times of emergency. So these are the advantages of police being the first responder to bring in relief. We also have a legal mandate in the Disaster Management Act. And we have already classified the kind of forces which are authorized to do certain jobs by Section 27(1) of the Gujarat State Disaster Management Act. Police, Gram Rakshak Dal, Home Guards, Civil Defense, SDRF, and State Reserve Police, which is the armed, 100% armed branch of the state police. And they have been classified and authorized to carry out the immediate response, during the response to give out the alerts, evacuation, of course, law and order, dead body management. Mr. Vyas was very kind enough to wax eloquent on the humanitarian forensics, and which is exactly what we mean by the dead body management. And of course, the aftermath in the medium term and long run, the relief and reconstruction. So these are the legal mandates that have been given to the police and the security forces. Now let's see, and we can discuss this also for a few minutes after I finish, how these things are actually carried out in practice. So maintenance of law and order during a disaster is the essential priority. And the police officers, they are specially trained to handle a crisis situation, to maintain the law and order. When a disaster takes place, we talked about some railway accident, there are major accidents, there are industrial accidents, there are industrial explosions. Now at that point of time, even the road accidents, major road accidents also, traffic control, rerouting is a very, very important thing. And police takes control of the whole situation and contributes to management of traffic so that other people do not get affected. And at the same time, life as usual should also run along with management of disaster. Search and rescue operations, they're crucial for finding people. He mentioned about the dogs sniffing, and then he also mentioned about the instruments which can catch the heartbeats. So forensic science people and the police, they combine together to find the living people under the debris and also the dead bodies. Evacuation, and evacuation is very, very important in post-disaster situation and even pre-disaster situation many a times. Since the cyclonic warning system has become very advanced, many a times, and I'll give you a few case studies, thousands and thousands of people have been evacuated from the possible site of disasters, especially cyclonic storms, surges, even flood, because flood warning system has also become very, very scientific. Before we release huge quantities of water from any dam, advanced warning system, many, many hours or some days in advance from the upstream is given to all those downstream villages where flood disaster can strike and people are just evacuated from low-lying areas to high ranges along with their valuables and their livestock. Human greed has no limits. Many people, they take advantage in the disaster situation. I remember in US, just 2 years back during the COVID, there were many instances of looting. Looting the Apple store, looting the other stores. Since because of COVID, lockdown and many other things were happening, people looted. And the same thing happens. I mean, all kinds of human beings exist. So for crime prevention, the role of police as a first responder is very, very important. We create shelters for the people who are affected by the disaster or people who have been evacuated, but it's very, very important to give security at the shelters, and police, again, is very, very crucial for maintaining security at the shelters. Relief distribution, obviously, after it takes place, police also helps, and they work side by side with other agencies, with the revenue department, with the NGOs, with the health department. They provide medical relief, they provide food relief. So all of these things, police works in tandem with many other departments of the government. Emergency services. Yes, fire brigade has to be called. Loss of life and people are hurt, health services are to be called. I'll again mention, I have a few case studies lined up for you here, that how police's role in lining up, in coordinating with various other agencies has been very, very crucial in management of these disasters. Public communication, obviously, as I said, police enjoys community trust, most of it. So, public communication, how to explain the situation, how severe is the disaster, what precautions people should take. And this, I personally experienced during COVID, how we utilize the services of police in COVID to regain or to manage the public communication and trust. Community trust, as I said. The police is trusted, men in uniform, and normally on the street we have the men in uniform only police. Army comes late or in very, very specific situation where the presence of army is required. So the law enforcement agencies, they enjoy public trust, and therefore their role as a first responder in case of a disaster is very, very important. Post-disaster assessment, again, loss of life, loss of property, surveys, post-disaster reconstruction, rehabilitation. In all of this, police has a very, very important role. Management of dead bodies. Mr. Vyas spoke about the management of dead bodies in details, so I will not explain how the dead bodies are managed. But then, yes, for insurance purposes, for other purposes, for rituals, yes, and police. Again, during COVID, I have personally experienced how police, they actually put their lives at risk. Because police, what happened in COVID, I'll come back to that when I speak about COVID. I have only 3 case studies lined up for you. One was earthquake in Gujarat. So as I mentioned, Gujarat, certain regions of Gujarat, and especially Kutch, falls in the high, very, very high risk seismic zone of earthquake. 2001 earthquake in Gujarat, probably in my life so far, it was the worst tragedy I have. And Mr. Vyas and all those who are present here, Narasimha also must have just joined the service at that point of time. It was a worst tragedy. More than 13,000 people died. Around 200,000 people got injured. More than 200,000 houses were destroyed. All industrial establishments in Kutch, they were dislocated. Widespread loss of life, complete dislocation. And it was, I remember the day of the Republic Day celebration. We all were celebrating the Republic Day when actually this tragedy struck Kutch. For many hours, the communication was lost. Police. So immediately the local police, the district police, and then reinforcements were sent by air. Large number of police contingents. 10 companies of State Reserve Police, 27 companies of Central Paramedical Forces, 4 companies of Border Wing Home Guards. Large number of officers. In fact, every locality was given to one officer. IAS and IPS officers. And we all slept in cars for many days. We went by cars, made cars our homes, and all of us worked in that disaster situation for days at a stretch. And police was the backbone. It was a massive earthquake. You can see here just 2 buildings, and they are the nerve center of the district administration. The collector's office, the district magistrate's office, and the SP's office. These are the pictures of those offices. Now think of the other buildings, the private buildings there. A massive destruction of public buildings, residential, non-residential. Now, in the first 48 hours of Kutch earthquake, the only means of communication was the police wireless sets. And from the rest of the world, from rest of Gujarat, the whole administration was carried out on police wireless communication. Search and rescue. Police mobilized equipments. Now, in those days, the JCBs and the earth movers and the hydras, they were very few in number. Now you can see in every street. But in those days, 25 years, 24 years back, they were very few in number. The police was sent to hundreds of kilometers around Kutch to mobilize those instruments. District Magistrate's office was the focal point of communication both with the national and the state government. It actually started functioning in a tent. The building was gone. So police wireless communication was set up in the District Magistrate's office. All markets were closed. Everybody's business was destroyed. How do the people get medicines? Now, police was sent to medicine shops to break open the doors. And in the presence of, we call it Panchnama, in the presence of a few people, a Panchnama was drawn, medicines were taken, and later on, due payment to the owner of the medical shop was given. So this is how police functioned. Communication links I have already told you. Wireless sets were set up at every place. Traffic management, obviously. You know, a lot of people had relatives in Ahmedabad, in nearby areas. They all started rushing to Kutch. One, to meet their near and dear ones. Two, for those people who were really anxious to help. Now, huge congestion on the roads leading to Kutch. So traffic management was also a very, very important function at that point of time the police carried out. Shelter homes, and then Gujarat State Police Housing Corporation. I don't know how much Gujarat State Police Housing Corporation has played a role in construction of the present campus. But at one point of time, Gujarat Police Housing Corporation used to be the only construction agency as far as the construction of houses and buildings was concerned in police setup. And state PWD setup inside Kutch was in disarray. So people were mobilized from Gujarat State Police Housing Corporation. Teams were sent to build up at least the government accommodation, the government setup in Kutch. Since there was an acute shortage of equipments, police officers and policemen, they stayed along with the earth movers in order to have the appropriate, timely, and sufficient utilization of those limited equipments. This is how the police played an important role in management. Dead body, respect in death, we have already been told by the Vice Chancellor. Police stayed and tried to stay at every cremation. Thousands of people died. Just to give a relief, mental relief to people, and also that presence was also necessary in case of issuing the death certificates, which were necessary for post-death formalities, property, succession, insurance, and all that. The second case study that I want to enumerate before you is Banaskantha floods. Now, Banaskantha is a district is bordering on Rajasthan. Those from outside Gujarat, Gujarati students know it very well. Again, Banaskantha traditionally has had very little rains. But in 2017, in 5 days, more than 110% of rains took place in Banaskantha of the yearly average. And that led to massive flooding. You can see the red portions, they were worst affected. Orange portions, they were also badly affected. So almost 3/4 of the district, massive, thousands and thousands square kilometers of area, for days together the water didn't recede. Now in this flood situation, how the police played a very, very crucial and important role. State Reserve Police Force was sent. Now we were in a better situation than the Kutch earthquake. Time had elapsed, technology had advanced, resources had strengthened, knowledge had gathered, response was swifter, and the geographical location was also not very far off, just 200 kilometers from here. But police, State Reserve Police, for months together stayed there. Because water, when it receded, post-flood trauma started in terms of disease, in terms of filth and squalor, in terms of removal of debris. That was very massive. So, hundreds of policemen were put on the site, and they carried out, roped in all kinds of relief work, including the supply of food and material and water and drinking water. Mind you, in case of floods, and even in case of earthquakes, drinking water becomes a very essential prerequisite for saving lives. And now, fortunately, we have those drinking water, small pearl pet bottles. So it's very easy to distribute or drop even from here. Police coordinated even in this flood situation with various stakeholders, government agencies, religious groups for relief, for food, and they played a very crucial role in Banaskantha floods. Last physical disaster, or I would say a disaster in our terminology, is the very latest Biparjoy, which just happened a few months back. Now, Biparjoy, again, how technology and the preparedness to deal disaster advances. Now, by now, we all are very, very well equipped to deal with these kinds of disasters. Now, Gujarat management of Biparjoy has been appreciated at the national level. The Prime Minister himself supervised and coordinated with the Honorable Chief Minister, the Honorable Home Minister also, the state administration. We all were alerted. Hundreds of policemen were deployed, and thousands of people were evacuated. In fact, Biparjoy is one of the rarest occasions of a cyclone all across the globe where not even one human life was lost. Not even one life was lost. And unfortunately, just compare it with Hawaii. Just compare it with Hawaii. What was the destruction, the fire destruction and other destruction, loss of electricity, complete disarray. A state like a country like United States, Hawaii was cut off. Hawaii was cut off for days. The electricity could not be ensured or restored in Hawaii for days at a stretch. Look at their resources, look at their budget, look at their economy. And look at us. How in Biparjoy, the state of Gujarat and the Gujarat administration under the overarching leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister ensured that not even one person loses his or her life. And state police, massive work. As I said, 56,000 people were evacuated in Biparjoy, and that is how we were able to save lives. Again in Biparjoy, maintenance of law and order, shelter management, which I have already enumerated, they were carried out by the police. And the last case study, I have only a few minutes left. And the last case study is again a very sad memory of just 2 years back, COVID. It was a health-related disaster, and definitely a pandemic is a disaster. And I had very, very close coordination with the police in maintenance of public order, in carrying out various COVID-related duties, in carrying out various restrictions of COVID, because COVID brought in a lot of restrictions. Restriction of movement, restriction of gathering, restrictions in terms of having the treatment or having the testing. And there, the police played an exceptional role, not only in Ahmedabad, but in the whole of state. We started, I remember, in the month of April, May. And that time, containment was the buzzword, containment. Because no one knew about this disease. Any army or any enemy which is known, you know how to draw a strategy to deal with that. But COVID was completely dark. The medical community knew nothing about COVID. The doctors were as knowledgeable as us. So COVID was a disaster wherein we learned by experiments. We experimented, succeeded, proceeded forward. And that is how every day we used to evolve a new strategy to deal with this disaster of COVID. And police was exceptional. I remember Ahmedabad police force is over 13,000. Am I correct, Narsima? I don't think even one policeman was left who was not COVID positive. Because in containment, to prevent the people from coming out of their homes in designated areas, police used to put up the fence. Obviously, they would be the first to be affected in case the people come out. In case of other actions, I'll enumerate a little later. The police were the first people to come in contact. So they risked their life, they risked their family, and yet the police in this disaster played a very, very crucial role. Like Mr. Vyas, I'm also a very great fan of technology. An Honorable Prime Minister, he excels in envisioning technology, and not only in envisioning technology, but also getting it implemented. So we were the first city in the whole of country to have implemented Arogya Setu. Arogya Setu was an app which was developed by a team of scientists or experts from IIT Madras. And Prime Minister told us that you all should first apply in Ahmedabad. How Arogya Setu works. Very interesting. And I'll explain the role of police also in it. So a person A, he gets infected. We know that he or she is COVID positive. Most of the people have mobile phones, cell phones. So this Arogya Setu technology is based on movement of a person from one tower area to another tower area of the mobile phone. Now, mobile phones, how do they work? How does the seamless communication work? All of these big companies like Jio or Vodafone or Airtel, how do they work? You would be seeing those long, tall structures, those pillars, with those antennas jutting out from them. They are mobile towers. And at every geographical intervals, those towers are put up so that when you are traveling, moving, the mobile communication is maintained. Sometimes we say, call drop. Why? Because the mobile phone goes out of the network of the tower. There are more than 1,200 towers in Ahmedabad alone. We got educated. Now those 1,200 towers, we used to identify the movement of people. Now this was a classified information. Under the Telegraph Act, this information cannot be shared. The Government of India did a special authorization only for very limited purpose of dealing with COVID. And that information was also shared with us in strictest confidence, only to be used for this purpose. Now, what we used to do, we used to track the person's movement in last 7 days. Because the infection period, his or her capability to infect others, only develops in last 7 days. So we used to identify the movement of that person and map it, plot it on the mobile tower map, and that superimpose that map on the geographical map of Ahmedabad. And this is how, it used to look like. And then not only map, but also identify the stay duration. Because for infecting others, you need to stay at a place for sufficient period of time to come in contact with people. So we devised a formula wherein a person's movement is identified, mapped, and the stay duration then is determined, and based on that, the probability of infection in that particular area was identified, and the whole of Ahmedabad city was mapped into high probability, high risk areas, which were pink zones, low probability area, which are the amber zones. Now, we used to get this information every evening. And our whole team used to sit together, including the police commissioner Ahmedabad and his deputy commissioners. And we used to decide the strategy of the next day. Now, how this information was important? We knew that this one pink zone is a high risk area. So we used to send our health workers and other workers in those particular buildings, and this was as accurate as 200 square meters. As accurate as 200 square meters, 200 meters by 200 meters. So whatever number of buildings come in that fall in that pink area, we used to send our health workers along with the police. And then we used to start massive testing. And based on that testing and the positivity rate, which went as high as 35 to 45% at one point of time in Ahmedabad, we used to declare the micro-containment zones. It was all technology operated. And the accuracy was 80%. That is how we use technology under the overarching directions and the vision of the Honorable Prime Minister. And this term to be known as Ahmedabad Protocol. The scientists and a lot of papers were written, and they were published in the international science journals on this. The role of police in micro-containment was extraordinary. And they used to be, in one day we used to declare 56, 70, 55 micro-containment zones, and policemen had to be put on every micro-containment site to prevent people from coming out. Then to tell people, now micro-containment became a punishment for people. I can't go out, I can't go for my work, I can't go for my daily grocery. And then we had to create a whole network of support, ancillary services. Send the milk wala, send the sabzi wala, send the doctors. So that supportive network had to be created for these containment zone. Again, the role of police was extraordinary in dealing with this. And the last thing, where innovatively I used the presence of police, was in something we called reverse quarantine. Now, reverse quarantine is a word which was coined by us. We know quarantine. Quarantine means that, unfortunately, if you have got infected, you remain limited to your room. You quarantine yourself. Quarantine is more personal in nature. Containment is more collective in nature. But what is reverse quarantine? So, what happened that from April, May, June, from high positivity of 30%, through the use of technology, through house-to-house survey, through testing and administration of medicines and other things, we were able to bring down the positivity rate by to almost 5%. Whereas other neighboring cities and other cities of Gujarat at that point of time was still having high positivity rate of 20%, 25%, 15%. Now, by that time, the lockdown was over. Public movement was also started. Public transport we had started in a limited fashion. But, you know, all the entries to Ahmedabad city, from Baroda side, from Rajkot side, from North Gujarat side, they were all open. Now, what was the guarantee? We calculated on the police checkposts and RTO checkposts. What was the number of vehicles coming in inside Ahmedabad? Thousands of vehicles were coming into Ahmedabad. So which meant that all of this good work of micro-containment, of pink zones, amber zone, Arogya Setu, with a lot of infected people coming from other cities of Gujarat, that work is going to be finished. So we again deployed police at 12 different locations. 4 main locations of entry into Ahmedabad, railway station, airport, and there were minor entries. So in all 12 locations of Ahmedabad where we put the police along with the health workers, and we mandated that each and every vehicle, the occupants of those vehicles, shall be tested before they enter the city of Ahmedabad. And that is how the entire city of Ahmedabad, with 8 million people, we quarantined from possible infections from coming outside. And police, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, police played an extraordinary role. And day and night, they stayed there along with my health workers, and we controlled the whole situation. So whatever we have talked, let's recapitulate. What is the role of police? Before disaster, during disaster, and after disaster. I wouldn't read out. I have already enumerated. You can just have a look. Police is an essential force to work with other stakeholders in management of a disaster situation. And we have had extraordinary examples in our state of Gujarat. I really thank you, Mr. Vyas and Mr. Thakur, the faculty, to have given me the opportunity of speaking and sharing my thoughts. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dotting the I's and crossing the T's as always, sir. Your discipline for detail is as good as it was in your first innings. Thank you very much for the brilliant speech. It must be remarked, I must inform all of you. Thank you very much. He's among one of those officers who can talk on international law, who can talk on urea products, who can talk on disaster management. One of those brilliant IAS officers that Gujarat is lucky to have. Thank you for actually coming and finding time for us, sir.